Hola, I'm Andrea Rivera de Vega, and this is Adelante, Pronto, a Milwaukee PBS podcast. After a year, COVID 19 has brought many changes to our day to day routines for children and adults. Schools continue to adapt to after COVID effects, and now, with more schools going back to an in person education or adjusting to a new virtual or hybrid routine, the question still remains for many families how to transition back to school and ease the levels of anxiety for everyone. In this segment, we will discuss some suggestions to help kids and parents transition back to school, whether in person, online school, or your child is transitioning to kindergarten next fall, or you're preparing for summer school. These tips are helpful to get kids back to school and have a successful school experience. As with any transition, the dynamics of school or new changes is not going to be a perfect science. So anticipate hiccups and be ready to roll with the punches. Today, we're talking about transitioning back to school with Rebecca Michelsen from Penfield Children's Center. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for being here with us today and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this topic with you and those who are listening.
Fantastic. Rebecca, let's jump right into the first question. Rebecca, after COVID, many family routines change. What are some of the normal behavioral challenges that parents and caregivers can anticipate and expect if their child is going back to in person school?
Sure. So there's a lot of things. I mean, one, our routines are changing. So with a change of routines, you might see a little bit of pushing of the boundaries and some more challenging behaviors because we have to adjust to a new routine, something that we maybe haven't done for over a year now. But something else that really comes up a lot of times with returning back to school, especially with new routines, changes, is separation anxiety and fear. And a lot of people think, well, that's only for really little kids. It only happens when they're like 2 or 3. But really, it can happen at any point for any age. So it can be, once they're in middle school, it can happen when they're in a younger grade as well. It's because it's a lot of change when that's going on. And then a lot of the unknowns also cause that to happen. And so it's not uncommon to see some separation, fear, and anxiety pop up again as we start getting ready to go back to school and even starting into the few weeks of school.
So, how important are routines now to prepare children to transition to going back to school, and how can we implement new ones?
So I think routines are one of those things that kids strive on. Kids love because they know what to expect is going to happen next when they have that routine. So that morning routine of when do I wake up? What do I do first? Do I brush my teeth? Do I eat my breakfast? Do I get dressed? And the same thing for bedtime, even. When I come home, what's going to happen? We're going to eat dinner. We're going to have some quiet time. If I have homework to do, there's a window of time for me to do that. Kids really do strive on that routine because they know what to expect is happening. And so you see less challenging behaviors. You see the transition back to school be a little bit easier as well because of the fact that they are knowing what to expect, what is going to happen. It takes a while to build those routines, so you can't expect them to work overnight. So when it does come to implementing a new routine, you need to give it at least probably a good month, if not longer than that, to really kind of start feeling comfortable with the routine. One, as the parent or the adult in that child's life, and kind of following that routine, but then two, for the child to get used to what that routine is. And one of the best ways to implement a routine and get both kind of parent and child on board is use a visual schedule. Work together, take pictures, use magazines, whatever it is that works for your child that gets them excited. And then what you can do is create that routine that it hangs on the refrigerator, it hangs in their bedroom. They can have a paper clip with it that kind of they slide along so they know where they are in their routine. And it's really great for getting them excited and taking some ownership behind it too, which actually builds a lot on their self-esteem and their self-confidence. So there's a lot of benefits to those routines. And again, implementing, it just takes time. It takes practice. It also takes a little bit of flexibility because we know things pop up, things change, and it's okay. We may try something for a month and we may say, you know what, this isn't working. we need to make an adjustment. We need to get up 15 minutes earlier. We need to go to bed 15 minutes earlier. We need to make sure that packing the backpack happens at night instead of happening in the morning. So we really need to make sure we have some flexibility with it. And it's okay to say, hey, we need to change things up. This isn't working.
And that's a great point because sometimes we get stuck on those ideas that we think they're going to work, but they don't. And then that's when a lot of conflict happens. It's like this is supposed to work and it's not happening. Allowing that flexibility that you mentioned, I think it's a great reminder for everybody. Now, we often concentrate on the child's routines, behaviors, and expectations, but we know that children can feed from their parents' anxiety and stress as well. What can adults do to ease their own transition so they can help their child better?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we can do is if we have a positive outlook on what's happening. So, we're excited about them going back to school. It gives them that positive feel about it and maybe put some of those concerns and worries aside. If we have concerns and we have our own worries and we have our children overhearing those conversations, we have them hearing our concerns and worries, they're going to have those same concerns and worries when they're going back to school, which where you might see that separation anxiety and fear kind of become more of an issue or a concern for a child, or you might see more challenging behavior starting to happen because they maybe don't know how to address that emotion that they're feeling or that fear that they're feeling. So it's really important for us to be positive about things. It's important too to talk about concerns that your child might have with them. So let's say they're worried about going back to school and having to wear a mask. How are we having those conversations with them? How are we putting them into a positive light? How are we showing them that it's something that we are all doing and it's not a negative thing? So really putting that positive spin.
Now, you mentioned information, talking to kids about information. How much information should you share with your child, and how important it is to share information with your child to understand expectations and ease anxiety? For example, how much should we talk about what their day will look like, their lunchtime, or new school procedures like with masks? How much information is useful, and how much or when is too much oversharing?
Sure. So that's a really great question. I think, there's a couple of things you have to take into consideration. One is the age of your child. So, you want to think about how much information you share based off of age. What you tell maybe a 3 or 4 year old is going to look different than maybe what you're telling a fifth or sixth grader. So that is one piece that you want to think about is their age. The other piece is you know your child best. So you know how many worries and concerns they might have, and you know how much to share before you're maybe causing that extra worry or anxiety that they don't want to have. But you also know how much information you need to share in order to make sure that you're calming their nerves as well. So really walking through that information with your child. I think the best thing too when it comes to understanding what's going to happen at school as far as drop off routines, things like that, the more prepared a child can be, especially if it's their first experience at school, the better it is. So they're not surprised when it happens. The other thing that's important is knowing that with the pandemic and things are changing. So the way, if you have a child who's returning to school, the way drop off happened before is probably not how drop off is happening now. And so that's the other thing we need to adjust for and letting them know, hey, it's going to look a little bit different when we go back because there might be these extra steps now that we need to do to enter the building. There might be these extra steps we need to do before you can even enter your classroom. So we just need to prepare them for that. I think it helps them again. It's that routine piece. It's helping them understand what their routine is going to look like. It's not done to scare them. It's just helping them to understand what their school routine is going to look like.
Now, what recommendations would you share with parents and caregivers that can make that process of going back to school or starting school for the younger ones easier?
Sure. So one of the things is being excited about the milestones. So there's tons and tons of great books out there that talk about going to preschool and going to kindergarten. And I mean, they've got everything from ones that are kind of set to like "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" to ones about a child who imagines his first day of school as being an astronaut on another planet. So knowing, your child's interest areas, there's probably a Pinkalicious one out there. There's so many different ones. So finding the one that attracts your child's attention is probably going to be one of the best ways. The other thing is get them excited, get them involved in prepping for school. Is it picking out school supplies? Is it getting a special lunch bag? What is that thing that is going to make them excited about it? The other couple of things that we want to get them involved with to get them excited about school and just even in general prepared and comfortable with school is if they're going to school and let's say they have to wear a uniform and it's new clothes for them, have them try them on before and wear them around a little bit before school starts. Because if the shoes pinch, if there's a tag that's rubbing funny all day long, it makes it hard for them to focus in school. So give them a little bit of time ahead of time in some of those items so that they can be comfortable with them, that it's not causing a problem while they are at school. Because again, nobody wants to be running around on the playground with shoes that are pinching their toes. And we know kids go through growth spurts. So what you might have bought for them, a month ago thinking, well, we know we're going back, they may have outgrown already. So it's really making sure we're prepared for that as well. The other thing that I think is really important with the young ones when it's their first experiences is also recognizing that they may have a little hesitation talking about going back to school. And if you notice that, like, as you're reading that book or you're starting to have those conversations, that they really just, are kind of starting to zone out and it's feeling like too much, tell them, you know what, it's okay. We can take a break from this conversation right now and we can talk about this at another time. So it gives them that permission that we understand that you're uncomfortable and that you're anxious about this. We're acknowledging it, which is really important to acknowledge it. And then say, let's talk about this at another time that you feel comfortable and ready to talk about this. So not pushing it too hard either is important.
What can adults do to make the process of the drop off at school or at the bus stop easier?
So I think first off is know what that drop off procedure is going to look like. Know what things are going to look like for the school, especially, if you are riding the school bus, things are probably going to look different as far as seating requirements. It used to be just probably hop on, sit wherever you want. That's not going to be the case. So it's knowing those types of things, but also when you drop off. I know for my child's school, one of the drop off things that we had before the pandemic and we still have now is he has to be on the passenger side of the car for me to go through the drive-through line to drop him off. If he's not, I have to park and I have to make sure that I walk him across to the school before I can get back in my car and leave. So it's just knowing that kind of stuff too with your routine. If I need to switch things up in my car and make sure he's always on the passenger side so I can do the drive-through line, great. If I know that that's not going to work because maybe I also have a younger child with me, then I know I'm parking every time and I'm going to have to get out and we have to think about that and we have to plan for that. But then it's also making sure everybody's got what they need. Not only are the children in need of the masks when they go back to school, but parents are as well too. When you are going on to school properties, a lot of times you have to be wearing a mask when picking up or dropping off your child. So it's as adults even being prepared for that. And then I think the final thing is, making those goodbyes meaningful but short. So plan ahead on what your goodbye routine is going to be. So, if you have a child that you're going through that drive-through drop-off line, how are you going to do that quick goodbye? Are you doing the longer goodbye at home before you hop in the car and then it's a quick high five and hop out the car you go? Or, if you are walking them, is it a hug and a special handshake? What does that look like? What does that goodbye look like? For some kids who have that separation fear and anxiety, that routine of the goodbye is really helpful for setting them up for a successful day and not having as much separation anxiety and fear. One of the biggest things we want to make sure that we don't do though is we want to make sure that we don't just disappear. So let's say we have to walk them to the playground. Let's say that's what we have to do, or we have to walk them to the bus stop and they suddenly get caught up playing with somebody and we just walk away. Well, a lot of times if you have a child with separation anxiety and fear, that's going to bring it on more because they don't know what happened. Where did you go? You didn't say goodbye. And so we really want to make sure we make that point to have that routine and we say goodbye to them.
I love that idea that you provided of the longer extension farewell at home for then have the quick one at the school. That's a great idea. Now, besides routines, Rebecca, the most important time for my kids and me is talking to them about their day after school. Why is this time important, and what are some activities that parents or caregivers can do with their child or their children after school?
Yeah, so it's really important to make sure that at the end of our day, we take time to reconnect with our children. When they've been away from us all day, we've been away from them all day. Take that special time to reconnect, find out what their day might have looked like, what had happened, share that. Now, for each family, this is going to look different because, again, if you've got a family who's super involved in sports and we're picking straight up from school and we're heading off to soccer practice or basketball practice or whatever that might be, we might be having those conversations in the car as we're driving from one place to the other. For other families, it might be something as simple as we're all going to work on preparing dinner together. And as we're preparing dinner together, we're going to have these conversations about our day and how it went, and share each with one of us, each one of us, on how that looked, or at the dinner table. For some families, the time that they really look forward to is that time after dinner. So let's sit quietly, let's read a book together, let's do something as a family together where we can reconnect and have that conversation. So again, I think it's thinking and finding what works for you and your family and your schedules. And again, each person is different, each child is different. So, what one child needs for reconnection is maybe going to look different than another child in the household. And so, you might have one who wants to sit down and snuggle up to you and read a book, and you have the other one who might say, "Yep, my day was great. We did this in math, we did this in, recess, we did this at gym." And then they're on their way to like wanting to do something else. And so, reconnection is going to look a little different for each child and each person.
And I think that also helps to keep touch bases to what is happening at school, and then you can touch bases with the teacher if the child needs more assistance or help, or what can you do at home to help the child and support them in their academics.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important too, is being able to support them in that way and have that conversation. So even if it's taking that time to go through the backpack, as well as, what notes have you sent home? I know in our school, we have a Thursday folder where every Thursday is where like the big school-wide important notes come home that, teacher conferences are coming up or whatever it is that we need to be aware of. So, I mean, it's also important to work that piece in that connection.
For our final question, Rebecca, if you could give 2 or 3 main takeaway thoughts for our audience about the process of transitioning back to school, what would that be?
I think for me, the things that I would want folks to take away is be positive. So be excited. I think we are all excited about school returning after this last year and not so much uncertainty for folks. So I think being excited about it is the biggest thing to take away. I think also just thinking about what are your routines and how do you need to adjust them. We have the routines from previous school years that we may want to fall back on, but we may need to recognize that things have definitely changed over the past year and we may need to make those adjustments. So think about what those adjustments need to be done, and then make sure you plan to try to incorporate them and be okay changing them if after you incorporate those changes, they don't work. Flexibility is really, really important, especially in today's world. We need to be flexible. I think that's probably one of the other biggest takeaways is be flexible with your child's school. They've spent this past year working and trying to figure out how to have students back in person, but still, we're getting new information every day on how schools should be operating and what's best practice and what's recommended for health and safety. And so we have to be flexible and go with what's happening, because that's the only way I think we're going to kind of survive this school year.
Anything else, Rebecca? Any
Yeah.
final thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess final thoughts for everybody is, if you want more tips, you want more information, you maybe forgot what we kind of talked about today, we have a website through our Coles Building Blocks program called PenfieldBuildingBlocks.org. And on there are a ton of great resources that talk about, separation anxiety and fear and transitioning back to school. But there's so many other great resources on there for anybody who have children in their lives. Just fun tips and activities that you can do if you have questions about nutrition or a certain condition that a child might have. A lot of times we have that information on that website.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for the great information, the strategies, and the tools that our audience can share with their families, especially during this time. That brings us to the end of this episode about transitioning back to school with Rebecca Michelsen, Community Outreach and Education Specialist at Penfield Children's Center.
Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you again for being here with us today. And remember, you can listen to our previous episodes by visiting milwaukeepbs.org/Adelante Pronto podcast. You are listening to Adelante Pronto, a Milwaukee PBS podcast. I'm your host, Andrea. Gracias y hasta la próxima.